This talk is about life after launch, what to expect when the frenzy of launch is over. Oh, that's somehow jumped ahead there. So a little bit about me. I've been involved with Drupal for roughly 7 years. I'm currently a senior developer at New Valley Media. We're the guys that did Drupal and video with Miraculous over there. We're involved with the South Carolina Drupal Users Group. It's based out of Columbia, but we rotate our meetings between Columbia, South Carolina, and Aiken, South Carolina. In Aiken, we've got a microbrewery that we host our meetings in, so it's a lot of fun. A little bit about New Valley Media. We are a group of developers working together to provide the best possible experience for Drupal-based websites. So we are just a group of people who do Drupal-based support, development, consulting. I do more of the development operations, developer, and anything related to commerce. It usually falls in my lap. We attend and sponsor a lot of Drupal camps, Drupal cons, and sponsor other Drupal-related events such as meetups. Okay, for this session, we're going to talk about how to plan for post-launch, what to expect, what you should plan for, how to design for maintainability. That's during the development of your site, but also sites that come in from external sources. So if you were to inherit a site from another company or for another entity, just kind of know what to look for, what to expect. Dealing with security updates, there are a lot of things to look out for. Typically, you can just go run and drush up. That's not always the best solution. At least know what you're doing, what modules are being updated, and the status of those modules. And we'll talk about more specifically what to look for a little bit later. Testing your deployments. That sadly is something that does not happen enough. When I mean testing deployments, you would want to do this definitely in a staging environment. You would want to have something like a centralized development environment. We'll get more in detail with that just a little bit. Deploying bug fixes, how to handle feature requests, code updates, kind of relates back to how you deal with security updates. Knowing your team, knowing the capabilities, the limitations, the people in your team, what they're good at, what their areas of focus are, and how to capitalize on that. To let them do what they like, do what they love. So just getting right into it, planning for post-launch. The first thing is you want to actually make it to launch. That's a pretty important thing. Make it to launch by having a viable launch candidate, understanding phase 2, understanding what that is, what that entails, such as moving non-critical bugs, non-critical feature requests to the backlog, getting something that's actually viable. Anything that absolutely isn't required to launch, push that to phase 2. Get that out of the way, out of remove any hurdles from that actual launch candidate, and finding that viable launch candidate. And discuss support early in the development process, something that you could even talk about before development even begins. Now this obviously will vary between projects and clients, but that's something you would just want to keep in mind. You want to have that discussion early on with your clients so that there are no surprises. There are no hidden fees, hidden charges, things that would come out of that. You won't actually want to have a plan to move forward, and everybody needs to be on the same page prior to actually launching the site. So that's going to be, the sooner the better with that. So making it to launch, there are a few things that you want to look for or definitely do before you actually have your launch date. Test the production environments early in the project. You want to get that set up. You want to have that conversation with Blackmesh, have that conversation with Pantheon, obviously have the conversation with the client. Probably we're talking to those guys. Understand the requirements of the site, the traffic, the analytics, what they're used to, so that way you can place them with the recommended host for what they're expecting for your traffic, for their user base. And you also want to have version control. Now this is something that I think should be rhetorical. Every site should be version controlled, but working in support, it's scary to see how many sites that come in that are not in version control. And when you actually have that conversation with the client, they have no idea what you're actually talking about. So that's something that you want the client to understand the benefits of version control if they have developers on their team that they rely on, and they're not using version control for some weird reason. Make them use version control. Even if you have to install it yourself, make sure they do it. There's no site that should not be version controlled. Standardize your launch requirements and deployment procedures. So you actually want to test your deployments early on. You don't want to come down to launch day and that's the first time you're pushing to the production environment. That should be rhetorical. Everybody should know that, but again, you'd be surprised. Do that early. Understand that you have, make sure you have the proper access that you need. Make sure that the environments actually have the proper support, proper packages and programs installed. And you actually want to have the client test that production environment prior to the fact. Now you wouldn't do it on the production URL, obviously, but you can do things like a beta subdomain or and put that behind an htaccess wall where they actually have to put in a username password before Apache even loads the site. That one prevents the public from seeing it, also prevents Google from seeing that, and it keeps things relatively safe. I guess depends on who you talk to, but for the most part, that will cover keeping that out of the way of your search engines from being indexing it and indexing that public site. Planning for phase 2. So this is after you have found that viable launch candidate, you have launched your site. Now you want to start thinking about phase 2. This pretty much begins immediately, and if you've had your early conversation with the client, they understand that this is kind of where support comes in. You want to review the backlog. So any tickets, any issues, feature requests, bugs that were not critical for launch, you want to dust those off and review that backlog. Take a look at the site, establish the deployment process moving forward. Once you launch that site initially, document everything. Document it well in case it's not you that's doing the deployment the next time. If you work with a company or a team, it might not be you that's always deploying these sites. So you definitely want to document your process, document any issues, any caveats with that production host. You want that to be documented and established, and if you can help it, now it depends on the host that you have, but you want to standardize that process just so that there's not much guessing. So when you go to a production host, you're always taking backups first before you deploy new code. Then you deploy your code, you understand what, if you're using Git tags, which hopefully you are, understand what tag you were on, how to check the tags. If you don't know how to do that, you probably shouldn't be deploying sites. Managed hosting versus unmanaged hosting. This would be your Pantheon, Acquia, Black Mesh, Platform SH will kind of fall into almost the middle. I mean, more the managed side. Black Mesh is going to provide a high level of support. If you give them a call, they're going to talk to you on the phone. If you send an email, no matter what time of day, you're going to get a reply, typically within an hour, generally much less. Black Mesh, I love their support, recommend them thoroughly. Unmanaged hosting, they're going to be your DigitalOcean, Linode, although they both do have managed services. Not sure about DigitalOcean, but definitely know Linode has managed hosting. But for the most part, that's where you're not going to have a system administrator. You're not going to actually have somebody to email for support. So that's something you definitely want to know going in. Now, some of your clients might have a system administrator. You might be the system administrator. You just want to be aware of that going into that. You actually want to know the benefits of managed hosting, the benefits of unmanaged hosting. Obviously, the cost is going to be less with unmanaged, but you get what you pay for. And plus the responsibility. That's another key issue too. So if you're working with managed hosting, the responsibility is typically going to be on the host, like Black Mesh. If you're requesting to install Apache or very specific virtual host configurations to Apache, which is where you need very specific things to happen, Black Mesh can handle that for you. If you're going to talk to, like, say, Linode managed hosting, they might give you some recommendations, give you some code snippets, and you're going to have to go do it yourself. But then again, there's a price difference between the two as well. So knowing where that site is going to be hosted and how it's going to be hosted is important. Establish that early, definitely before phase 2. But dealing with any type of issues, at least with the environment, managed hosting is very nice to have around. So yeah, again, discuss support early in the development process. You want to establish your requirements at the very beginning. Discovery time is a real thing. That's for those of you who are not familiar with discovery time, this is basically when you get a feature request or a bug and you don't know much about it. You need to reproduce this bug. You need to find out the source of this bug. What caused this bug? Was it a recent update that we pushed out, or is this something on the client's end? They might have a problem with their computer, or they might have let their kid get in and install some games and play with some games, and now they've kind of got some spyware or adware on their computer, and could be something there. So definitely want to have discovery time. Sometimes you might be able to get around without using it, but you definitely want to have a conversation about discovery time, what it is, and what to expect with that. And set expectations early. Keep an open line of communication with your stakeholders. This could be through Jira, this could be through Basecamp, this could be just through a old-fashioned phone call. You definitely want to have, you want to satisfy the expectations and their need to know what's going on with the project. Now, obviously, you don't want to give into every single request, because some requests might not be the most sane. So you definitely want to understand what they're asking for, why they're asking for it, so that you can set those expectations not only with the client, but also with the developers. Also knowing, keeping that open line of communication helps that tremendously. So designing for maintainability. You definitely want to, this is more surrounding the projects and the modules that you use for a project, or that's what I'm referring to with primarily here. You just want to do a lot of research for your modules. You don't want to go just installing modules willy-nilly on a website there. That can lead to a lot of bad times, as some of our friends would say. Project activity is a pretty quick way to determine if a module is worth your time. So things like how many sites use this module. If there are 2 sites installed, it could be a very new module. That's a thing. New modules come out on Drupal.org every day. So how many sites you currently use and how many times it's been downloaded is not always the best determinant, but it's a pretty good one. Obviously, you'll be able to see when the module was released, and if it's a low number, you can kind of put those two together. Another thing is how active is the issue queue. If it's a popular module, you want to hopefully not see a lot of issues in the issue queue, but I mean, issues happen, things happen. People just might not understand how to use the module, so they post things to the issue queue. So just because there are a lot of issues in the issue queues of the project page might not necessarily be a bad thing. What you want to see is that those issues are actually being responded to. You want to see that some issues are being resolved, they're being marked RTBC, put it back, there's patches being applied. That's a good sign that that's a healthy module, that's a healthy project. Module compatibility. This is a big one. You want to be sure, especially in Drupal 7, definitely moving into Drupal 8, that your modules are compatible with Field UI. Definitely want to be compatible with views. Features and strong arms, very nice. We'll talk more about that later on. But that's a very good module to be compatible with. Rules, feeds. There are a few other modules too. Does anybody have some examples? Some of the developers in the room, some modules that may have been left off here. N80 API is one. Panel, I guess who you're talking to, but yeah, panels, display suite, some of the front-end modules. So, yeah. Okay. So, resource control and module overhead. Don't get too carried away with magic modules. This is kind of the concept of installing a module to give you the quick fix. This is sometimes desired, and you actually get this with typically junior devs kind of getting into that. They find a module that seems to do what they want, what they're looking for. They install it, they do some base configuration, and they think they're done. Well, it could also be causing some random Drupal go-tos, which take you to random pages. You might not be aware of it because you didn't test it right away, or you didn't test it thoroughly enough. Then you might stumble across the issue weeks or months down the road, and then you're going to have to backtrack and trace down where that's coming from. So understand what you're actually installing, understand the code. The module files you can download, you can open them. It's not hard to do. Look through those modules, understand what they're doing. Monitor the performance throughout the project. There are several ways to do this. The more popular of today's time is New Relic. It's great for just monitoring performance, gives you a lot of data on what is causing sites to be slow. Is it a view with 20 relationships and about 1,000 joins? I mean, like there's a lot of things that could potentially do that. Just because it puts it to the screen doesn't mean it's the most performance conscious. Another good thing to do is just using features to export functionality from your database to code. We'll still get into this a little bit more, but basically the idea is using the features module to take the things that you build on Drupal and export them into a custom module. That gets it out of the database, that puts it into code, which then allows you to do things like version control your code. Also, obviously gets things out of the database. So I mean that saves you some resources there. When all else fails, there's cache all the things. You can cache a lot of layers in Drupal. External caches such as Cloudflare as a CDN provides added security, protection against DDoS attacks, provides you analytics and a whole lot more. Cloudflare has a free service. If you have a website, use it. It's fairly awesome. Definitely check out Cloudflare. Contributing modules versus custom modules. Both have benefits. Custom modules can be, exactly that, building a whole lot of functionality yourself and adding that to the site. But it can also be something as simple as a few hook form alters that are changing just the way the front end of your site looks. Something like that, although it's technically a custom module, but doesn't have the level of functionality as, say, something like features or views or CCK, rules or feeds or some of the more robust modules. So who maintains the code? There's if a custom module that's your code versus a contributed module, you gain the redeeming feature or a very nice feature of Drupal of community support. Contributed modules provide that, which is a nice thing. Plus developer familiarity. Basically, having developers being familiar with the modules is a good thing, because if your developer leaves, or I call it the truck factor, if I ever get hit by a truck, it's nice for somebody else to be able to come in and pick it up, to understand the module, how it works, and not have to ramp up and actually do discovery time just on the custom functionality of the site. So being familiar with the modules is a desired thing. You get that with contributing modules more so than custom modules. And I just put stuff. So contributing modules, again, we have community support, module familiarity among developers. It's typically more cost effective. So this is a module that you're used to using. You know how to use that. You've worked with it before. A lot of people have worked with views. They've worked with field UI. They've worked with rules. You can do a lot of, build the functionality of your site and actually be able to more accurately nail down a budget, or at least an estimate for that work. When you get into custom modules, you then have to worry about a thing called scope creep, which through client interaction can then add additional overhead or requirements to a module that might seem simple at the time, but 2 days later and hundreds of lines later, or sometimes even thousands, you'll find yourself missing budgets and going over time estimates. So. The redeeming factors of custom modules, it's very high granularity with the data, with site content, so you're actually only doing what you tell it to do, as opposed to using the contributed module route that makes assumptions for you. So try to stick to more of the building block modules, as I like to call them, things like rules, basic field UI, use content types. ECK is another great one for building custom entities, to do that. But yeah, then the custom modules, who is maintaining the code? The custom module, if you build that, then you would think that you would be maintaining the code, or somebody else would be, possibly for a client. Since nobody else has that code, your site would be the only one that actually has that in operation. So use the Drupal API, use the tools of the trade, use hooks and best practices and with coding standards with Drupal to do that. You'll have a better time. Again, it's often more costly and it's more time intensive than using a contributing module in most cases. So. Okay, so dealing with security updates. This is basically just when, with your contributed modules and Drupal core, how do you just maintain those updates? I just came from a talk with Connerton where he was talking about using BOA, that's Barracuda, Octopus, and Aegir, to manage a lot of your sites. That is a great, fantastic solution. Aegir provides a way to quickly update your sites and then get those out. With some, there's some ramp up time, there's some knowledge there and a little bit of overhead. But that's one way of doing that. We don't use that at New Valley. We actually script a lot of our updates to where we do things like lock any future updates we run. We download the hacked module, which will go through not so much our sites that we build internally, because we try not to do that, but when you inherit sites from third-party sources, you don't know what they've done. So you actually want to know what that code base is, what's been changed, what's been modified. Has any source code from your contributed modules been changed from what was given to you by Drupal.org? That's kind of the definition of a hacked module, if anyone's questioning that. You want to document patches. A lot of times you'll run into bugs and weird issues with your modules that have not made their way back into the module or even the development release of the module. There may be a patch for it that somebody else contributed to the forum. So in this case, if you use any patches, document those patches. Use Drush to lock future updates. But yeah, understand what those patches are actually doing, document those patches, and when you update or try to update the modules that have been patched, see if there's been a new patch provided, or see if that patch has then been added back to the development release or the stable release of the module. Because if that is the case, then you don't need the patch anymore and you no longer needs to be locked. So you want to document that, you want to understand which modules have been updated, which ones have been locked, which ones have been modified. Document that, and document that for every website. You'll have a much better time. And then establish a release plan. So that's going to just be, understand when you release your sites. Some companies don't deploy to production on Friday. I think that's a great idea. I think wish more people would get on board with that, so you can help me with that. But reason for that is being that some companies leave early on Friday, some developers leave out early on Friday. That's a thing. People do that. Developers have lives too. People, and not just developers, content creators and themers and front-end people do as well. So respect that time. So at the same time, if you push to production on Friday, something breaks, and you get in contact with somebody, you might be a whole weekend with the site being down, and that's not good. So try not to do that on Friday. I understand there's sometimes just not an option with some clients. But try to do that. It leads to a better time. So yeah, maintaining a healthy code base. Don't hack modules. It's a horrible thing. Leverage the Drupal API, hooks, the Drupal functions that are there. Use the Drupal file system. Try not to hard link straight to your files directory. So that's something you don't want to do. For onboarding external sites, Hacked and Coder, two fantastic modules that any developer, any site builder should be familiar with. Again, just kind of go over the Hacked project is basically just a module that you install on a site. You run a script, it goes through, it checks every module that you have installed on your site. It compares the current version that's installed on your site to the version that's available on Drupal.org and basically runs what they call a diff between the two to find the differences between the code. It's going to highlight that, let you know what has been changed, whether it's just a README file that was removed, which is not a big deal, or did they actually go and change CSS in a module file for some reason? You don't know. You kind of want to know about it though. Coder is going to do something similar, but give you more coding standards. What was actually, is the code that you're now working on, or it's now yours, and you're maintaining. Who was that built by? How was that built? Was it built in a sane way, or did they just kind of throw up, cram a bunch of just a bunch of raw random PHP that they've copied off Stack Overflow into your site? So Coder is going to help you find that out. And actually something very simple, just keep your modules in relevant directories. So this is more of a file system thing. Modules, contributed modules, keep them in places like contrib, custom features modules, put them in a features directory. Custom modules, you can put custom, patched, and patched. There have been other directories I've seen too. If anybody has any examples, definitely feel free to shout them out. But this allows you to keep relevant modules in relevant places. So everything in contrib has been is a module that came from Drupal.org that has not been modified. If you've patched a module, move it to patched. I probably should have added this to this slide, but the drush rebuild registry command's very useful for moving these around. Something from contrib, you move that to now patched. After it's been patched, you're going to have to rebuild the registry to basically make Drupal know that this module has been moved and it's in a new place. Custom code and go into custom modules. So again, document patches, lock future updates. It's very simple to do with drush. It's the part of the drush up command. So you can try drush help up, and it tells you everything about that. So this isn't to talk about drush, so I'll just kind of gloss over that one. And basically what this is going to do is prevent drush from automatically updating modules or future modules that have been locked with drush up. So if you just do drush up tac y, which is a really fun command, if you have everything set up just right, it'll update all your modules, and you'll have a nice life, and you won't have to deal with that too much. But that's generally not the case. Drush up or locking modules with drush up is useful. And definitely review previous locks. I mean, there could be a lot of reasons why you may lock a module. It could be because a patch has been, the module has been patched. There is a new patch, and it's a lot of code. You don't have time to patch it yourself. Definitely, if you patch yourself, put it back on Drupal.org. Do somebody else a favor. It's really good. Plus, it makes you look good on Drupal.org. So, be a hero. And keep up-to-date code or up-to-date documentation for a project. So this kind of goes back to the module updates, but just weird issues, weird instances where things happen. Just keep very good documentation and make everybody aware that documentation is there. So there's been a lot of times where I spend writing documentation, then I have somebody else come talk to me a month later about all this documentation that I just wrote that they never saw. So that's if you have that standard and people expect documentation to be on a project, that's a good thing. So just establishing standards is a big thing. So establishing a release plan. So basically, kind of going back over, do we have access to the hosting environment? Who has access to the hosting environment? Who is actually delivering the code? Is it a single person? Is this an automated instance? Is this an automated task of code being deployed from, say, like deploybot or deploy.io or some various scripts? And how would you actually deal with deployment mishaps? So if you're deploying a code, hopefully not on Friday, but let's say it's Friday at 4:45 and everybody else has left the office for the day and you just blew up a site. I mean, what do you do there? What kind of plan do you have in the event of that happening? Now, it's happened to me a few times, not recently, usually getting started. That's, I like to call that learning by fire. So that's, I did it late at night and blew up sites and couldn't sleep that night and had to fix it. So you definitely want to have a plan or how to react during that situation. So doing things like not deploying on Fridays is one measure to get yourself in that position. So just kind of have that discussion, know at least internally what to do in that case. If there's somebody to call, is there somebody that's expecting to call? And if that person, have they ever been called? So I mean, I've rarely get calls when, actually I've never gotten a call with one mishap, thankfully. If that were to happen, I probably wouldn't expect a call. So, have that conversation early on, and actually let people know that, have a plan of attack and something like that happens. Okay, so testing your deployments. This kind of comes around just establishing a standardized workflow. This could even be something like Pantheon's, their development, staging, production environment. Blackmesh has their Cascade service, which does something similar. So does Acquia, so does, it seems like everybody's doing this now. Platform SH is another big one. Standardize that, have a workflow. The way we handle this, or at least at New Valley, is that we, with every ticket that we have, there's a branch for it and there's a site for it. So there's actually a publicly accessible URL for every task that we work on. That can be reviewed by the client, that can be reviewed by other developers, that can be reviewed by the project management team at any time. There is no requirement to push code up or commit that code. You're actually working directly in the environment that is publicly accessible. That's the way we handle it. Some people handle that differently. We actually have built a custom platform to do that. So unfortunately, that's not something that you can go out and download. BOA is actually something very similar to that. You could use something like that to get a similar experience. Yeah, with the different branching. So yeah, like Pantheon's multi-dev service, it's I think it starts with their professional service. I think like $400 a month. You can get unlimited environment. I think unlimited environments, different branches that actually have publicly accessible URLs. So there are a lot of options out there, a lot of hosted options as well. And then just development environments and understanding is kind of going back to what I was previously talking about. So some people develop local, some people use a shared environment. There are pros and cons to both. The traditional model is local development. We do a little bit more shared development, more so, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But yeah, so establishing that workflow. Who's the release manager? Establish a Git workflow that makes sense. Some people take, they'll take their branches, they'll push them up to your development site, then they'll merge it into staging, getting ready to go for final review, getting remerges into production, and then they'll merge the entire staging branch into production. That works, it gets your code to where it needs to be, but maybe something hasn't quite passed QA with a client yet. So if you actually merge an entire branch that contains a lot of commits into, pushing that upstream, you could accidentally push something that doesn't need to go to production yet. So establish a Git flow that actually makes sense. Like I said, I prefer to do individual branches up at a time, unless I have a bulk of them that I know absolutely have to go to production. So just make something, establish the flow that makes sense. Plus, it allows it to where you can document that, and we can get somebody else to come in behind me, or somebody else to follow that same documentation and have the same experience for the client each time. And then working with third parties. So we see this a lot. Working, they're having that type of environment where you actually do have a lot of branching and actually have a logical Git flow. That helps tremendously. You can maintain separate repos. I would recommend keep it to one if you can help it. But yeah, you can definitely push to 2 repos. But there's some things that you can do to kind of make that easier too. And we're going to talk about that. Quality assurance and automated testing. BHAT, very promising way. We actually have a talk from Mr. Zietlow over here tomorrow, I think at 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock. So yeah, 1 o'clock, this gentleman over here is going to be telling us all about BHAT testing with Drupal. It's a very interesting talk. I've heard quite a bit about it. I've seen a few other previous presentations. It's a great talk. Definitely check that out. Selenium is going to be a tool for automated testing with different web browsers. So basically you use think of it like a Chrome extension that you install in your browser. You go to the sites, you go through, you do some things, you go to some different URLs, and this little extension is saving what you're doing. It's basically building up that profile. I went to this page, it's this user, I did this sort of thing, and then it sends it off to Selenium. Selenium will then take those instructions and repeat those across a lot of browsers, a lot of different operating systems, and provide screenshots back. So that's a very useful tool for automated testing. Good old manual quality assurance, going there and actually checking that yourself, making sure things work. That's still a thing, still useful, and doesn't require a lot of automating. So automated testing is kind of the thing of the future. There's some stuff here now for it, more specifically with Drupal, I would say, just because of the simple test. But yeah, tomorrow we're going to have a good presentation about that. So definitely looking forward to that one. And actually limit client interaction between different phases of quality assurance testing. What I mean by this is more related for after launch. So when you develop a feature and you have that on your branch, you need to test that. Our process is typically to have the client initially check that out on the working branch. That's on the branch that was created to do that initial work. Once that's been tested and the client's satisfied, we know it works. We build testing instructions, we build merge instructions, and then we go down the line. So what we do from there is typically merge that into a centralized integration point, which allows us to actually test the deployment, kind of like a dry run of doing that, similar to what some people use it for a staging environment. We have this a little bit lower down the chain, but it allows us to quickly test, enabling a feature, is the functionality there, do we get all the right permissions? Plus it gives us an opportunity to build out our testing instructions and have our internal team test that. So limiting the client interaction, the point of that would basically be to not bore the client. We don't want to keep asking them to do the same thing over and over again. is good. You definitely want to test it a lot of times, but if we can get the client to okay that functionality, then we can kind of test that internally. So once we work with the client and get that, once we realize that they're satisfied, then we can then move on the chain. We can test internally, and then only have one final time where it's actually testing that and reviewing that on the production site once that's been launched. Shared development environments, again, that's kind of what we use. This is where we use a single server to host all of our code. We do the work on the server. The benefits of this, well, there are quite a lot. So one is I'm not tied to this one computer. If I were to drop and break this computer, or if somebody were to, heaven forbid, steal the computer from the airport or something, I wouldn't be out of work at least. I could still find another computer, can be back up and running in just a few minutes, and have access to the code that was on the remote server. That's a nice benefit. Another benefit too is where I mentioned having that that client URL, that forward-facing, that public-facing site is always available to you. So if there's a developer who might be a little more junior and they need some help, they need a review, but they have database changes, and it might take you a while to push up the code. Here's a copy of the database. Install this on your local. Get all this stuff set up. That's a time-consuming process. I mean, compared to the shared environment, I go to my URL, I click the URL, I copy it, I paste it in my Messenger, HipChat, and then I'm done. Like that's it. We're on the same page now. So that's a pretty nice benefit. But there are some things you give up. So local environments, you're going to one, have a lot more performance typically on your local machine. Your site and only that site is running on your machine, so something that somebody else may be doing in that shared environment might not be stepping on what you're doing. So that's a benefit. Also, it doesn't require the internet, so if you want a place like an airplane or a trip to Atlanta, you can still work. And we use the cell phones today, so and the internet's pretty much available everywhere. So day by day, the shared development environments are just getting a little bit better. Again, centralized integration points serve as a test deployment prior to hitting staging, making sure your functionality works, making sure you have everything included with features. Centralized integration point is a very nice thing, especially with working with multiple teams. So it allows you to kind of have a centralized place where code is reviewed, where code is staged, where content is entered. So I mean, something like that allows you to maintain a single place of content entry as opposed to steadily changing URLs. You're editing content in one place. If you're building your code and your functionality right, you can just then import the database, revert a bunch of features, clear some cache, and have a brand new, up-to-date refresh site. Okay, so deploying bug fixes, feature requests, and code updates. It's starting to get kind of redundant, but the biggest thing is information gathering, documentation. Again, I've said documentation 100 times now, but it's very important. Information gathering could just be as simple as, what browser are you using? How big is the monitor that you're using? What operating system are you using? These basic questions that sometimes are often overlooked when that initial conversation happens with the bug, with a bug report. Feature requests. Actually, going back to bug fixes, can this be reproduced? Is this something that we can find on our team, whether it's a developer, whether it's a project manager, or even just a quality assurance person going through and actually reproducing that issue before it hits developers? Very costly time. So that's something you definitely want to be able to reproduce prior to it actually hitting a developer's plate. Version control is your friend. Be comfortable and get familiar. So it's something that, again, every site should be version controlled. You want to be using that heavily and extensively. Information gathering, debug tools is a great module that we developed, and it's on Drupal.org to kind of get a lot of the information from the client initially. What the debug tools will do is in the administration menu, it will add a debug tools button. So you click this button, and it sends an email. It's very basic, but it does some cool things along the way. It lets you know what operating system the client was using when they saw that, the URL that they were on, which, funny enough, is rarely given when you're getting a bug request. So, it gives a lot of information about the viewport size, the browser, the computer, the operating system, all this stuff. It's JavaScript enabled, which I would hope it would be. all this information will just come to you along with this email and this information about the specific bug that the client saw. It's very simple, very light module. You definitely would recommend installing that and using it. Establish acceptance criteria and budgets prior to starting new tasks. This is definitely more related to after launch support. Acceptance criteria is basically the requirements to satisfy the client. To make this task be complete, what does this need to do? Very thorough acceptance criteria is preferred. And also establish that budget early on. I mean, you shouldn't be working on a task where you don't know. I mean, it would be nice if we had just unlimited budgets and clients that had that, but typically in the real world, that's not the case. So be aware of the budget, set that early on. If you're going to go over budget, stop, talk to your project manager, talk to the client, talk to the stakeholders, and reset those expectations. And early in the development process for a feature request or fixing a bug, write up some testing instructions. Make this very simple for, if you have that manual quality assurance process. Document how to go, what user you're doing this as. There is the Gherkin text, which we'll hear more tomorrow in the BHAT talk, but that is kind of a standardized way for writing these testing instructions. And you want to do that so we can then match the acceptance criteria, deliver awesome new updates, and keep clients happy, right? So can the issue be reproduced? Was this only reproduced on production? Was it, if you have development environments, hopefully you do, can it be reproduced there? Did this happen from a recent update? Did this happen from a new module that may have been installed? And once you resolve these issues, document them, document the fix, document everything, make the team aware, talk about it, have a discussion. And again, version control is your friend. It's free, you should be using it. Use it. There are some Drupal modules to pay attention to when you're using this, features, and strong arm for Drupal 7. Configuration management for Drupal 8. Features, basically, as mentioned before, this just basically takes functionality, content types, views, rules, feeds, things like that, exports that to code. The benefits of doing that, one, is it gets it out of the database. Two, is that you can then merge that via Git and can deploy that quite easily. And just overall performance, it makes it just far, far better. And it doesn't require you having to go and rebuild things twice and 3 times over. Using features in StrongArm, you use that with features. Basically what that does is it expands features and allows you to export variables into your feature. So certain configurations you can put in there, actual settings. So for example, my Google Analytics ID, I can export that and make a feature module very specific to a client that has their configuration for Google Analytics. So if they ever somehow have access to that and change it, update it, delete the ID, you can revert the feature and it's back like it was. Branches, pull requests, and rebasing. Branches, they're real, they're a thing, they're still free with every repo or every Git host that I've seen. Use them. A lot of times you might be using version control, but you're only using a single branch, and you're committing all this to one branch. So it's not, you're using it, which is better than not using it, but you're not using it as efficiently as you can. There's tons of documentation on Git and how to use that out in the wild, so I won't get too far into that. But pull requests, allow a more senior developer to actually review the code before that gets merged in. Allow that to go through some sort of quality assurance before it actually gets merged in. Pull requests do that for you or help you do that. Rebasing, make sure that your branch is new, is fresh, it's most recent. So a lot of times if you're using Git, you can find yourself having that snapshot of a much later time when you first created the branch. Rebasing allows you to get the most recent changes from the parent branch. So it's really good. Know your team and know your limitations. So know your team online and offline. Obviously know them online, know how to get in touch with them, know how to talk to them, but know also what they're into, what kind of things that they like. They're, like I said, they're people too, just like you and I. So know what they're into, know their specialties, know their area of focus. So if you're a project manager, you want to be able to give the commerce work to the right commerce guy. You want to be able to handle our front end stuff. You want to be able to handle that, or task that to the people that are best suited for the job. Understand that, know that early on when onboarding new developers. And again, respect developers' time and life, and this goes both ways. So it's not just developers. There's project managers and everybody in content entry people too. So people have lives outside of Drupal. So understand that you don't want to overload them. You don't want to overwhelm them with a lot of tasks and just bog them down. It takes time to ramp up from one project to another. So keep that in mind. If one person's working on 10 different projects in a day, it could be confusing for some of them. So give them some time, give them some credit there. Getting to know your team, there are a lot of ways to do that. Coming to Drupal camps is a great way to do that. I see some Media Current folks here. We're here. I'm sure there are a lot of other teams here too. So DrupalCon's a great place to have fun, much larger events. The next one's going to be in New Orleans. It's going to be fun. How did they get to where they're at? That's always interesting to me. What did they do prior to being a Drupal developer? How did they get to where they're at right now? There's a lot of interesting ways that people have taught themselves how to code, how to basically get to where they were. So understanding that can help you build a more dynamic and close team. What are they into outside of Drupal? I mean, this could be just something as simple as what kind of beer do you like? When we go to the beer out, yeah, it's getting close.
No rush, no pressure.
Is there like a beard requirement at New Valley?
We actually have kegs installed at the office. Beard.
The CEO doesn't have any. The CEO can't grow any facial hair, so he's the only one. I think
that's why we all have beards, though.
physically grow one.
Let developers specialize, use their time efficiently. Again, don't overload developers. Happy developers lead to happy clients. Happy teams lead to happy clients. So keep that in mind. Respect the time. Don't overload them. Standardize. Standardizing helps decrease ramp-up time. So, all this documentation and standardized practice makes it easy to go from can make it easier from going from one project to another. So, it's a very useful thing to do. Again, keep an open line of communication. Set expectations early. Maintain those expectations and reset them when needed. Just some other useful information here. A few hosting platforms that you definitely want to be familiar with. Platform SH, Pantheon, Blackmesh, Acquia. All these guys provide multiple environments. So your standard dev, stage, production. All of these provide managed services. Some provide command line tools such as Platform SH, CLI, and Terminus. Some hosted services. We've got Discuss for social comments. That offloads a lot of the overhead for the Drupal commenting system, which is not very great. Let's face that. Discuss is a great way to use social comments. It takes 5 to 10 minutes to install. Node Scroll, automated backups that are free. So I don't know why anyone wouldn't be using that. I guess you probably have a few reasons, but it's a very good service. JanRain, customer information manager. So this is basically going to give you that login with Facebook, login with Google to your website. It makes it considerably easier to install and manages that too. So if you have a WordPress site or if you have a Drupal site, and for Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, you can actually use JanRain to migrate those users over. Or actually, it wouldn't be migrating them, but you would just use JanRain on the new site, which would then allow the users in the JanRain database to be able to log in. So that's services like that help out tremendously. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions specifically? Maybe talk a little bit more about things.
So do you ever look at when you're doing a production release, like the impact of how much you actually put into production? Like say you want to upgrade some hardware, and you move say from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, and you get like 50 new features in there, and you're like, then all of a sudden things don't work out. There's too much going on.
Yeah, so going back to New Relic, that's a way to kind of monitor that ongoing, or that throughout the development process, just to kind of see how much memory is actually being used. With our development servers, we kind of have a baseline, so it's a 16 gig server, which is a lot for development server, but going through and using the site, developing that quality, doing the QA testing and doing those iterative deployments prior to getting to staging. It allows us to kind of go through and judge that, see how that actually does perform. Testing, a lot of that comes up. So when trying to translate that to a production environment, it really comes down to the host. Hosts like Linode or DigitalOcean, you can add memory as needed. It's a lot easier to do that. Hosts like BlackMesh or some of the dedicated servers, it might take a little bit more to do that. So knowing that information prior to the fact is going to be useful.
Obviously. We've taken clients before too that weren't so robust, and then they were more scalable. They scaled up, and they needed more resources on their hosting end. So at that juncture, you can always contact them and get more resources allotted for what you need.
Yeah, because I've been burned where people put in, I call them kitchen sink releases. Like,
Oh yeah.
You throw in everything in there.
Everything.
The kitchen sink.
Yeah.
You're like, there's a little bit too much going on here. Maybe do more smaller releases and break them up.
Definitely, yeah. And also, having that as a separate branch too also gives you, or branching, for example, although it doesn't sound related, but if it comes down to a very specific commit or a very specific person or project or task that actually happened with, you can go and then revert that commit and come back to it and actually, come back to that task and rediscuss that, reassess that. So a lot of things that you can do along the way could prevent something. I wouldn't say it's random, but it's seemingly random to having to know how performant your production server is going to be with your current Drupal site. So a lot of things can help. But yeah, New Relic, I would definitely check that out.
Okay, thank you.
So any more questions?
You mentioned two things like automated testing, BHAT and Selenium. Did they go through like every kind of scenario, like conflicting modules, things that can break with what's existing?
There's going to be a talk, a very good talk tomorrow about that. So it'll go in more detail then. But they not so much the modules that are there, but very much the scenario type of testing. So as an anonymous user, I can go to /cart and expect to see a checkout button. That type of syntax can be used for BHAT to then it's called Gherkin syntax, but to use with BHAT to make sure something like the permissions are set up right for commerce, so that the customer can actually add things to the cart and then actually check out. So you would do things like that. So it's kind of like scenario driven. You build up these tests, and then as you have them there in your code base, they'll actually be run against the production environment. They'll actually do regression testing all the way back. So if you do actually have something that fails testing, it'll let you know exactly where it failed, how it failed, and right away that identify which branch or which specific commit actually did that. Selenium is just going to be more of the cross-browser testing, so it's kind of going to give you the screenshots, let you know something's not all borked on a certain page. But BHAT probably sounds like the more robust, kind of the pie in the sky kind of deal. I mean, it's really cool. So I'm really excited about that presentation tomorrow. You can probably tell. So. So if you guys have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. WillJackson00 on Drupal.org. My username is WJackson. The email is will.jackson@NewValleyMedia. We've got the after party at the World of Beer. That's happening in like 10 minutes, so I'm sure you guys are about to go over there. Free beer on Acquia. Woo! So thank you, and thank you, Drupal Camp Atlanta. Thanks. Thank you.